All right. Hello again, everyone. Welcome back. This is going to be our lecture on American modernism, or American Modernism Part 1, you could say, which we could subtitle The Disillusioned Moderns. So today we're going to dive into some of the most influential writers of the early 20th century America and explore how they responded to a world that seemed to be falling apart, you could say, both culturally, morally, and psychologically. Sound good? Sound cheery? Great. Let's dive in. Okay, so first let's start off with the definition. Modernism is a literary and cultural movement that emerged in the early 20th century, roughly between the 1910s and the 1940s. It developed as a direct response to the disillusionment caused by the First World War, the rapid pace of industrialization, and massive social upheaval. In literature, modernism is characterized by fragmentation, alienation, experimentation, and a distinct break from traditional norms. These writers were not just trying to make sense of the world in comforting ways, they were showing just how senseless it often felt to them. Some historical context for you. World War I was a cataclysm that shattered illusions of progress and morality. The sheer scale of the trauma left writers searching for new ways to express their fractured realities. Then you have the Roaring Twenties, which brought a surge of consumerism, social freedom, wealth, but also excess and a sense of moral and cultural instability. Then we have the Great Depression, starting in 1929, which forced a reckoning with the myth of the American dream. It exposed deep inequalities and left millions disillusioned again. Big word for today, disillusioned. During this time, prohibition, gender shifts, urbanization, and the growing influence of Freud's psychology further destabilized people's sense of identity and place. Modernist writers responded to all of this with a stylistic boldness and emotional honesty, often confronting the uncomfortable truths beneath the surface of American life. I should also note while we're here, before we continue, that this week the reading and lecture, as in the assigned reading and the lecture material right now, is only going to focus on one sector of the American modernist experience, Their work is not the only narrative of disillusionment. Next week, we will shift our focus to the Harlem Renaissance, which worked alongside this. This will explore how Black writers like Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, and Claude McKay created their own modernist styles, shaped by racial identity, cultural pride, and a resistance to systematic exclusion. That juxtaposition will reveal how modernism in America was never just one story, but many story told through different lenses. So just to keep that in mind before we continue. All right, first up, we all know this guy, I should hope, the famous Fitzgeralds, F. Scott, was born in 1896 and is often seen as the literary voice of the jazz age. He and his wife Zelda lived extravagantly, and their lives were emblematic of 1920s excess. Behind the glitter, you could say, Fitzgerald struggled. They both did. But with his alcoholism, his finances, and his own fading fame, he died in 1940, largely forgotten at that time. But his reputation was, of course, received posthumously. Babylon Revisited was published in 1931, and it is a poignant story set in post-stock market crash Paris, i.e., the start of the Great Depression. It reflects Fitzgerald's own regrets and the collapse of the 1920s dream. Themes include, again, regret, loss, and the consequences of excess. It re examines, again, the American dream, not as a promise, but as something corrupted and elusive. Fitzgerald's style is lyrical, controlled, and rich with symbolism. It's interesting as you read. Note how time and memory function in the story. Keep that in mind. Okay, another big hitter next on the docket is the infamous, again, Ernest Hemingway. Born in 1899, Hemingway volunteered as an ambulance driver in World War One, but was seriously wounded. This trauma would haunt him for the rest of his life and bleeds throughout almost all of his writing. He's also famous for what he calls a quote unquote iceberg theory. So, this would be writing that he says shows only the surface with deeper meaning submerged below. So, keep this in mind as you read. So, published in 1925, excuse me, In Our Time captures the psychological aftermath of World War One. Its disconnected, fragmentary form mirrors the fractured consciousness of its characters. Themes include trauma, masculinity, and disconnection. The interchapters offer glimpses of violence and chaos, which creates a collage, you could say, of post war disillusionment. Again, Hemingway's prose is stark, almost journalistic, but very emotionally resonant in its restraint. This is the key. All right, let's move on to our third author and text this week, William Faulkner. So, Faulkner, who was born in 1897, was a Southern writer with a very unique narrative voice. His work dives deep into the psychology of his characters, often using experimental techniques. He also won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1949. So, moving to As I Lay Dying, which was published in 1930, right at the beginning of the Great Depression. As I Lay Dying is a Southern Gothic novel that uses death as its narrative axis. It explores family dysfunction, mortality, and existential absurdity. The novel is told through 15 narrators, 15, using stream of consciousness and nonlinear structures. It's chaotic, strange, and profoundly human, showing just how fragmented perspectives can build towards a larger truth. This is one of my favorite writings of all time. Very, very much adore this story. All right, lastly, we've got Gertrude Stein. So Stein was born in 1874. And though she lived most of her adult life in Paris, she's considered one of the great American modernist voices. But in Paris, she would host these literary salons that would bring together artists like Picasso and Hemingway. She was openly queer and very deeply experimental in her writing. Now, Tender Buttons. This was published in 1914. It is an early modernist text that sort of defies easy categorization. If you've already started to peek at it, you'll see. It reads like poetry, philosophy, and honestly, nonsense all at once. Don't let this put you off. Let's keep at it and try and dive under the surface if we can. The work focuses on the defamiliarization of everyday objects. It uses radical linguistic play and challenges both meaning and gender norms. Essentially, what it's encouraging us to see is that language and identity are fluid and unstable. So, again, it's not really about the plot, about understanding what's going on. It's more about perception. Keep that in mind. Okay, so let's just review a few core ideas, to take with you. First, American modernism emerged in response to major cultural upheavals such as war, economic collapse, and changing social norms. Secondly, these writers broke with literary tradition through fragmentation, stream of consciousness, and minimalism. This style was as important as content. That's very important to note. Third, the dominant themes were alienation, loss, and the failure of the American dream, offering critiques of modern life. Literature has now become a new way to process historical trauma, both personal and national, and to experiment with new forms of expression. Next week, we are going to expand this very one thread view of modernism to include voices of Black writers whose vision of modern life were shaped entirely different, but no less urgent realities. All right. So there's modernism. If you have any questions over the lecture, the readings, and so on, feel free to reach out via office hours, course chat, what have you. And yeah, great. Happy reading, happy writing. Have a good week. Bye.